My guest on this podcast is Manni Chopra, somebody who's been involved in property for nearly 2 decades like myself now, and during that time she's been focused on high quality HMOs down in the southeast, but also then evolving into taking commercial properties, turning them into residential property, and then building new builds out of the ground as well. It's been quite a journey. We go into the nuts and bolts of building a £20 million portfolio, the things that worked well, and also some of the lessons she's learned and things that we should avoid doing. So let's get straight into the podcast.
So back in about 2008, 2009, my kids were about 5 and 7 at that point. And I was like, I wasn't really happy with my job. It was a no-win situation because the kids, I felt really torn. As a mum, of younger kids, obviously now it's different. But when they were little, I really wanted to spend quality time with them. So I had like a specific goal. So I took a sabbatical in 2010 and I said, look, at the end of that 12 month, I want to be in a position to replace my job income, which is around 3,000 net. Yeah. And I thought, look, I reckon 2 HMOs in the southeast could potentially do it. So while I bought the first one for 305, this was 200, probate, complete disaster situation, as in needed complete regutting and back to brick situation. And that was an easy 5-bedroom HMO conversion. So that was my second HMO, which then helped me bridge the gap and make me £3,000 net income.
Manny, first of all, thank you for being here. And it's such an amazing journey that you have over the years, 15 odd years in property now. You've moved from IT to doing property full time, built an amazing £20 million portfolio, which is, quite an achievement. And sometimes people think, busy mom, corporate job, Asian background, there's a lot of connotations people have built up. How's that experience been for you?
So yeah, but thanks for sharing the value of my property portfolio. I've never shared it before. So well, I think I need to get it out there. Can't be shy about it anymore.
In terms of the experience of that, because that's a huge amount you've done, and we'll break down through the podcast kind of the various journey and the different steps and the. Yeah. But in a nutshell, when you look back and you reflect, how do you feel?
I think I need to reflect back a bit more. I think I'm just going on and on and on, and I think you're right actually. Somehow it didn't quite play in my mind, although people do mention it to me a lot, to saying Asian, women, but kind of in my own mind, I haven't seen that as a limitation. So I don't know if it's a good or bad thing.
I think that's a really good thing because sometimes people will tell us we'll have barriers that will be presented to us. And if we don't see them as barriers, we keep pushing forward. If we see them as barriers, then we stop and we think, oh, I can't do that because I've been told X, Y, Z. So that's a great mindset to have. You think, well, it might be an issue for somebody else, but I don't see it as something holding me back. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, a lot of my friends, some of them are homemakers, and that's what they love. They love what they do, and they kind of think, how are you doing all this? And I was like, I don't know, I'm just doing it. Yes. When you're in the midst of it, I think.
Yes. And so the journey has been HMOs, commercial conversion, commercial to residential, and new builds. That's been the core strategy that you've done over the last 15 odd years. So take me back to the beginning of your background as in IT. You had an IT job, and how and why did you start thinking about property?
So back in about 2008, 2009, my kids were about 5 and 7 at that point. And I was like, I wasn't really happy with my job. Yes, I had an IT job, and everybody on the out of it would think, oh, wow, you're doing well. You've got a decent salary. You've got 9 to 5. What is not to like? But I kind of wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. It was a no-win situation because the kids, I felt really torn. As a mum, of younger kids, obviously now it's different. But when they were little, I really wanted to spend quality time with them. And I kind of felt that I didn't have that growing with my mom because, I was one of 4. There was a lot of issues going on. It wasn't intentional, but I just felt that I didn't have that connection with my mom. And I felt I wanted to have that connection with my 2 kids. So it was a kind of very strong calling to say, look, I've got to do something about this. It's, it's not going anywhere. IT, as you know, is deadline orientated, project orientated. They wanted me. I was in a 4-day week, but it didn't kind of feel that way. It was that whole school drop, a breakfast clubs, after school clubs. It was like, where is this going to end?
It's not the job didn't really fit around what you wanted in terms of lifestyle. So why did you choose property then rather than, I don't know, starting another business like Amazon dropshipping or something else? Why property?
Well, I did start other businesses
Okay.
actually. But now that you ask, I started when I was with my second child. I had a year off, and I started, believe it or not, a diamond business,
Wow. Okay.
which no one has ever asked, but I'll share that with you now.
Yeah.
And it was a case of I was working with a Mumbai-based diamond merchant,
Okay.
and he was giving me stock, and I was trying to sell it here. But then I thought, look, if order for me to have this credible business, because I was doing it as exhibitions and stuff,
Right.
I had to then open up a shop. It was like a massive commitment, retail business, and all of that. And whether I was ready for that, I wasn't quite sure. So I tried my hand in a few other things, and then property kind of clicked because I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, as you would, and that kind of thought, well, actually, it's not this whole 9 to 5 and, work till you die sort of a scenario. And that's how I got inspired by property.
Okay.
And so Robert Kiyosaki attended a super conference, and
Right.
that kind of kicked it off really for me.
I think a lot of the key learnings that people get from Rich Dad Poor Dad is the realization that you can own assets and businesses that generate income without you having to work for money. Money works for you rather than you working for money.
Hugely mind shift, right? Huge mind
yes.
shift, yeah.
So you're based down Slough, Bracknell Way.
Yeah.
And so what type of property did you decide, because I know you started with HMOs, was there a filtration process, or was it a case of, well, everyone's talking about HMOs, so maybe that's where I need to start?
So I had like a specific goal. So I took a sabbatical in 2010, and I said, look, at the end of that 12-month, I want to be in a position to replace my job income, which is around 3,000 net.
Yeah.
And I thought, look, I reckon 2 HMOs in the southeast could potentially do it.
Okay.
But to be fair, there was a bit of filtration going on. So I did look at Midlands, and I did buy HMO in Coventry to start with. But it then went on to some sort of a social housing model. Right. HBPR scheme, I think Coventry introduced housing for the homeless, something the other sort. But I thought, look, I'm going to leave a job to then get back into another job, because I'll be driving up and down the motorway. I'm still not going to be able to do school runs, because my motivation was flexibility and time freedom.
Okay.
And that wasn't going to be, I wasn't going to get that through looking for properties up north or in the Midlands, because I would be just in the car. And I didn't like driving for long hours and looking for property and then researching that. So I thought quickly filtered out locally within the 20-mile radius. So I looked at Aylesbury, I looked at a few other areas, and then in the end I thought, look, let's just stick to my patch, and back in the day it was all about BMV, below market value is what, when you started training, that's all they said, you got to find the BMV properties. And I was like, what am I going to find in Slough? I tried to put BMV offers and stuff like that. But it wasn't really happening. Nobody was taking 20% BMV offers in Slough. Yeah. But somehow then I realized, look, I then met Romy was doing some sort of mentoring program with someone.
Romy's your husband?
My husband. Yeah. And they then looked at this high-end HMO model, which they thought was, look, buy a house, okay, it's going to cost you a lot more than you would somewhere else in the country, but then instantly you can make an income out of it. So that whole strategy where you can pull your money out and go again wasn't going to work. But what would work is you got cash flow straight away. So because my immediate requirement was get the cash flow in and then worry about everything else later.
Yes.
I had that single mind focus, and that's how I started doing Let's Look. So my first HMO I bought it for a huge amount of money at the time, was £305,000. Okay. So at the time, 2011, that was, it was quite a big amount of money back then. And it was a ready-made HMO because it had 5 bedrooms already, and it had a very large living space. So immediately I just put a stud wall, created a 6-bedroom. So 6-bedroom HMO. I spent about 10 grand doing it up.
Was it an existing HMO or family house previously?
Family house.
Okay.
Family.
It lent itself well for an easy conversion.
Easy conversion. And I wasn't, I didn't have any construction background either. So I was quite happy to go ease into it.
Yes.
So that
started off being the first HMO. And how did that work in terms of income and profit? Did that meet the expectation, what you thought it would do?
Absolutely. I think I made about £1,200 a month net.
Good.
Because, rents in the southeast were pretty good.
Yes.
And Bracknell was quite a untouched area, if I would say so. Yeah. And it was the secondary Thames Valley, Thames, Silicon Valley of the sort of UK. Because
got a lot of
Reading.
So
you had Reading, which was the main, the Microsofts and the Googles of this world. And then you had Bracknell, which had a lot of employment, but not enough housing for the people who were working in Bracknell.
Mostly they're professionals, high earners.
All working professionals, all on 35, 40 grand a year. And it was like perfect, amazing market.
Yes. You've heard the phrase, your network is your net worth, and you'll also hear it in this particular podcast as well. That's because people in property recognize the importance of being connected with other people. Property is a people business, and that's the reason I've been running a networking event for over a decade now. Each and every month, we bring like-minded people together, an opportunity for you to come along and meet some of those people, and also learn from other people on the stage, learn from myself as well. So make sure you book onto the next meeting. We're on the third Tuesday of every month in Birmingham. Now let's get back to the podcast. And then was it a case of just multiplying that and doing 20 more, or was that not
I wish.
not as simple as that?
Not as simple as that, because remember I mentioned to you that my cash ended up being in the property.
Yes.
So what I did do was my initial cash that I used, I had some savings because we were like double income, no kids in the beginning. We put some savings.
Yes.
And we initially did buy a couple of buy-to-lets when we had some savings as well. But what I did was I made some really good money from a property which I did in Mumbai, funnily enough, off plan.
Yeah.
So all the courses tell you never buy off plan. You know, I did exactly the opposite. Bought an off plan property in Mumbai, which I bought for £50,000 in cash.
Yes.
That was back in 2003, 2004.
Okay.
So when it was 2010, 11, that was quadrupled, not only quadrupled, that was then worth £250,000, because that was the time when India was going through a really high, steep capital appreciation.
Yes.
And then I just pulled that money back out, sold it, got the money back in, and then I bought my second HMO using the funds from there.
Okay.
And that was a slightly different proposition. So I bought a probate for about 200,000 in the same area. So while I bought the first one for 305, this was 200 probate. Complete disaster situation, as in it needed complete regutting and back to bricks type of situation. And that was an easy 5-bedroom HMO conversion.
Okay.
So that was my second HMO, which then helped me bridge the gap and, you know, make me £3,000 net income.
Yes. And so you continued to do HMOs for a period of time before you started changing the strategy a little bit. So tell me a little bit more about your more recent or last HMOs that you created.
Oh, my last HMO was an award-winning one, actually, funnily enough. It was in Slough. It was something that was going kind of very low value. So it was for 320,000. It was 350, actually. So we negotiated down to 320. And you're getting 2-bedroom apartments in the Horlicks factory, which is a Berkeley Homes one. A 2-bedroom flat for 350, 375. So I thought a house, 320. It needed work doing, which obviously we love anyway. And I thought, great 6-bed HMO, single story extension. That's it, done. Job done. 320. I spent about 150 grand doing it up. So I got a good contractor who I worked with previously. You know, very easy project. I got it valued at 600,000. So I left about 50 grand in there, but I'm getting 5,000 net income from it, gross income. Minus obviously mortgage fee, bills and all of that. But you know, great on the numbers.
Yes. And how many rooms is that one?
6 bedrooms.
6 bedrooms. So you said something there which I think is really key when we look at this type of model, is you paid around 300 or 320 for the property, but the end value is about 600. And I think that's a good number to measure with. If you can create an end value that's twice what you paid for it, you're probably in the right ballpark at the high end. Now, it doesn't work everywhere all the time, but it's a nice kind of guide to use. So talk me through what you spent 150,000 on. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. But actually, it was a good deal. Because other contractors were quoting about 180.
Okay.
So we spent on back to brick, 6 en suites, spent it on the single story extension, new heating system, 300 litre water tank, just really insulation, making it, I think it was a C in the end. So just making it sure that it's going to be a long-term, durable HMO, good quality insulation, and we can get some good quality tenants as a result and charge some high rents.
Yes. And I think that longevity is really important that you talk about. There's a HMO that we're just buying at the moment, which was probably created, I'm guessing 8-9 years ago. They'd said, and now we're purchasing from them with the intention of we're just going to do a complete renovation on it. It's already operational, 6-bedroom. It's 2 bathrooms, I think. It's shared bathrooms. And I think if the original investor had created it with the longevity in mind, they wouldn't be selling it today. They're selling it today because it doesn't really perform as well. And I know why it doesn't perform. It doesn't perform because it's not really designed for today's demands and living.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we talk about insulation and sound insulation, even none of those things really exist in that property, and so it's scope to improve it. But it's quite a decision to say, I'm going to make this investment and for the long term, this is going to pay me back. In the short term, it's going to be I'm spending
Painful.
probably more than what some people would see as necessary.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important to do that, though?
Because I think, as you said, it depends on what you stand for. If you stand for quality and you want the high rents, so like for example, that one, we pushed the rents to £1,000 a month on one of the rooms.
Yeah.
It was the largest bedroom in the house, and it had obviously the ensuite. But easily we managed to get £1,000 a room in Slough, which I think is not London.
Yes.
It's slightly on the outskirts, and 4 of the 6 tenants were nurses. So great market, because it's literally a mile and a half from Wrexham Hospital.
Okay.
So great market.
Yes.
Like literally every time you put an advert out in Slough, you get 10 people looking for rooms there, good quality rooms. And like you said, people are willing to pay that extra to live in a nice house.
What sort of things do you think have evolved in what you put into the houses from the first ones to the more recent ones? How has the designs, or what you put in them, or how has that evolved and changed, do you think?
So before, my mindset was, have a lovely big living room area, communal is important, they'll create a community. But I've seen over a period of time, the living room's used for drying their clothes. They're not really socializing like you think they are. Some of the houses might have that extra camaraderie and friendships going, and that's great if they do. But what I'm finding is they are more and more living in their rooms, so giving them the room that they want, so ensuite, wardrobe space, lots of storage, because especially girls and women, as you know, we've got a lot of stuff, right, which we gather over a period of time. And so, ottoman beds, lots of, like, I'd say custom-made wardrobes, built-in wardrobes rather than the whole sort of ones on wheels, where, which has its own advantage. You can move them around or whatever. But I'd say lots and lots of storage, a huge, lovely ensuite. Even the ensuite, you have, instead of doing like just, scrimping and saving and half painted, half tiles, have, floor to ceiling tiles, good quality luxury tiles, or maybe waterproof panels, tanking the bathrooms, making sure the leaks, because you don't want that call in the middle of the night, my bathroom's leaking. So investing more in spending more time and money up front so you can avoid those issues later on.
Yes. So the first few you started using your own funds, so you used your own money to put that in, and you'd also done various training courses, learning at the time, and we were talking before off camera about the importance of actually implementing that, because you can quite easily spend your time learning, but not doing.
Yeah.
And most of the learning, we both agree, that actually happens in the doing. When you're implementing it, then you experience issues, challenges to do that. So the growth, I'm assuming, came from the BRR type strategy, where as you went on to buy more property, you'd refinance and extract the money out in order to fund the next one to keep going.
Yeah. So I think it was kind of a bit slow. Yes, absolutely that. But it was slightly longer. So unfortunately, we had to leave the money in there for slightly longer. Being in the Southeast, as you know, you're a higher value area, so you are ending up putting a higher capital in it. You're needing 150,000, sometimes it's equity, to put into the deal. Then you have to spend another 100 and something grand. So, yes, but then we took money out for most of our HMOs, but in time, not immediately, which was obviously the pain point for us. And yes, there was a period where I ran out of money, and I'm like, what do I do now? So before I built up my investors and all of that, then there was a time period where I actually sourced some HMOs as well for investors. And I kind of felt that was one of my limiting beliefs, if you may say so, is where I didn't feel or believe in myself as much to say, look, I've done these 2 HMOs, now I should go out and, seek investors and investor funds. Whereas some people, when they have the confidence and belief straight away, and then they think, I've done 1 deal and I can go out there, raise funds, all that. I don't think I had that in the beginning. So I think that's where, if I look back on my journey, I think I should have believed in myself a bit more. Maybe if I had a mentor at that point and thought, look, you've done 2 great deals, both slightly different deals, but good outcomes, create on cash flow, help you get out of your job, which is a huge thing. And I don't think I capitalized enough on that. I think.
Because that was the transition point. The 2 houses meant actually you now had enough income to replace the salary, so you could get out the job.
Or ditch my boss, whatever you may want to call it.
And have time around the family, which was the key driver.
Absolutely.
So with the more recent projects, where is refinancing the kind of key model? Is it a case of, right, we need to get this property up to like 600, then we need to refinance and extract that cash out? Would you say that's the
Yes,
key
definitely.
model?
I think so, because from the HMOs, obviously we progressed on to doing new builds and commercial to resi and all of that. And that was a strategy, buy and hold. But I think it's kind of changing now.
Yes. So with these, the HMOs, I guess one of the things that we talk about a lot in conversations and people ask about is, if that is the model, what's the most important part? And I often say the most important part is what you're trying to achieve, the end goal. And if the end goal is you need to extract the money out, then you need to make sure you can achieve that before you start. Otherwise, you're gonna, and unfortunately, we meet many people who are stuck in that process because they got some of it wrong. How do you ensure that you're going to get the 600, 650 figure that you have in your mind? What sort of tips or advice can you give to to get to that outcome?
Into it. There was a product, if you remember, Bridge to Let.
Yes.
So that was a time where it was so easy because they would come in around the beginning and look at your current project.
Yes.
Then you would say, this is what I'm going to be doing, 6, 7, 8 rooms, whatever you're doing. This is the income I'm going to produce. And they would actually give you a commercial valuation up front that would completely de-risk your project and you know exactly what you're going to get. Unfortunately, a lot of the lenders have pulled out of that because of the uncertainty since 2022 and Liz Trust and all that.
Yes.
But because we know the area, we kind of know the yield in that area. However, you've got to be very careful. It does change. Yes. So like my last HMO we did, we were hoping for a slightly higher valuation than 600. We were thinking around the 650 mark because we were looking at an 8 or 9% yield. But then when we went into the valuation, they said, the yields have gone up at 10%, which means you get less capital. Obviously, the higher the yield, the less the value. So you've got to be careful. But if you know your patch well, you kind of know. By speaking to a lot of people who've done HMOs in those areas, you can try and extract that information because it's not common knowledge.
Yes.
Your broker can't tell you you're going to come in at 8% yield or 9% yield. That's the uncertain part of it. But if you speak to enough people in the area who've done projects before you, they can kind of share their evaluation reports, if you will. So, establishing those relationships and those connections in your patch is very important.
And I think you're absolutely right. It's about de-risking as much as you can because there is no way of having that complete certainty. It's going to be like this. It's not formulaic that you just do this, this, and this, and this is the outcome. You can influence that, but you won't know for sure. And as I said, understanding that lenders will vary their criteria, the lenders' guidance they give to the surveyors might vary. Surveyors will have different opinions in terms of what those yields or rates are for that area, even the room rates. For example, we've had in the past where we've achieved very high rents, which are way higher than the market averages, and the surveyors thinking, that's amazing what you've done, but in my view, this is the market rate, and they override. So these things can happen as well.
Well, what's happened to me again with another one is one of the HMOs in Slough came in at 450,000. And I was like, what's going on? Yeah. But there was a huge problem there. So the 6th room, which was a single room, had an ensuite with it. And what happened was, I think, obviously, when we did the plans with the architect, it had the 6.52 square meters, which is the minimum size you need for the room. But somehow, I don't know what happened, whether the ensuite was slightly bigger than what was meant to be. The room ended up being slightly smaller than the 6.52. Right. So he didn't even use the 6th room as a...
he dismissed it completely because he said it doesn't meet the...
And then he increased the yield, which meant it was valued at 650 and 450. And it was like, this is going to kill us. Wow. How are we going to pay back the investor, right? So be careful of all those little things. Yes. And because we never had a single ensuite before, we should have made sure that the measurement of that room, once the ensuite stud walls went in, that it's still 6.52. Yes. Or with a double room, 10 square meters, Yes.
And that just leads me on to, we'll talk about how the journeys are progressing in HMOs. And before we start talking about the other strategies, what were some of the challenges you faced in the HMO journey?
I'd say raising capital in the early days, refinancing, pulling your money out for us was a huge problem because it wasn't like the Midlands where you go again. Yes. I know so many people who've done... Coventry is, very big, popular one for student HMO especially. So many of the people who are part of my Titans community have done HMOs in Birmingham, Coventry, what have you, and pulled out money every single time. Some of them even got cash back many times. And I'm like, I wish I'd done those deals. But, I made a conscious decision not to go into the Midlands for a reason back in the day. And then, so those are the huge challenges in the Southeast. But on the positive side, huge demand, but I'm sure it's the same in the Midlands. So I think, definitely raising capital, keeping the costs down for the works. the costs are going up and up and up.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
well, this is squeezing in your profit margins or what you can pull out every single time.
Yes, so certainly through the lockdown period, we saw the prices for labor and material just really massively escalate, and how much we're spending now on a house compared to what we were then has increased quite significantly.
30%,
Yeah.
30, 35, 40% in the Southeast for sure.
Yes. And so at what stage then you started thinking about a different strategy? So the other strategies you've done includes new build and also commercial conversions. At what point in the journey did you start then thinking about, okay, maybe we need to look at a different strategy?
So in 2016, actually, quite earlier on in my journey, I met a couple of people through networking events, and one of them had a lot of experience in planning, and the other guy was a great sourcer. So somehow, I don't know what happened, but we teamed up and we looked at planning as a strategy. So we said, look, let's do planning uplift, because you can make huge gains in the value of the property, like sometimes 40%.
Just clarify for somebody who may be watching or listening who's not familiar with the term.
Planning uplift is when you buy either land or a site with, as it is. So in our case, it was just a house, a bungalow. And then you get planning for, like in our case, 8 apartments. So the end value, which is the GDV, the gross development value, you then take a percentage of that as land value, typically 30-40%, depending on, when you are. Like right now, I think it might be more like 30%, depending, because it's always like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 is the price of land, 1/3 is the construction cost, and 1/3 is the profit, was the sort of industry average. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. But so what you get from when you've got the planning permission for 8 apartments is the value of that site goes up by 40%.
So the value on the site is increased without doing any physical work on the
just getting planning permission on it.
And I guess the increase is so significant because it's so difficult and painful to go through planning and slow. And by you doing that, it means it's ready for a developer to come in and just get on with the next part, which is the build out, and they'll pay a premium for that, hence the increase in value.
That's right. So 2016, we saw this strategy. We thought about it. We found a bungalow which was literally on Rightmove, but it was on a street which had lots of previous bungalows where they'd converted into blocks of apartments. So it was the footprint of the bungalow itself was small, but the plot was quite big. About 950 square meters was the actual plot size, and we saw precedents where people were granted planning permission for blocks of flats. And the guy who was my partner had planning experience. So we got his architect on board. We did a pre-app. So we put an offer in firstly, just as a bungalow. Offer got accepted. And then we kind of went into conveyancing. We did a pre-app. Pre-apps are before you do planning, you do like a pre-application. Pre-apps, the good thing about that is it's not common knowledge.
Yes.
So you won't be able to go into a portal and a planning portal and say, put that postcode in, and the pre-app won't appear.
Yes.
It's
So
kind
the
of
seller doesn't know, the agent doesn't know that this is going on in the background.
Yeah. So put a pre-app in for 9 apartments.
Okay.
And the pre-app came out very, very positive. And I think they said 8 apartments, because if you look at the plot, on one side was another bungalow.
Okay.
So they said on that side, you might have to taper it down. Right. So we had 3-story house, a block of 8 flats, but on that side it was 2 stories.
Right.
So they came back with a positive response.
Yes.
At that point, we then exchanged and completed on it. Okay. We rented it out as a buy-to-let to a family while we were getting planning on it. And we got planning for 8 apartments. So it was quite easy, actually.
Yeah.
Our first experience was quite a positive one for a change.
Yeah.
And then what I did was I bought out the 2. So they didn't want to do development. I'm not sure what came into me. And I thought, this might be a great opportunity to learn about development, because you always looked at the developers and you thought, oh, wow, property development sounded like something that, another step up effectively.
I talk about it as the aspirational journey. Everybody wants to get to the developer stage.
Yeah. It's not as sexy as it sounds, does it?
Yeah, when you get there.
When you get there.
Yeah.
So anyway, not sure what overcame, but I thought, look, it's a great opportunity. I've got this planning uplift, but the other guys were not keen at all. So I bought out their shares. So we had 1/3 each. I got another partner to buy out the shares. So we did like a company sale, like a share agreement.
Sale of shares.
Sale of shares. Yeah. So no stamp duty involved. So that was good.
Or
so
minimal stamp duty. Yeah.
0.5% stamp duty, I think it was, on the sale of shares. So then I did that was my first sort of foray into development.
So it's quite early then in the journey. You were still doing your HMOs at the beginning of that journey, and then you started into the development.
Ground up.
So how did that development work? Was it demolition and then a new build of the 8-9 apartments? Or
so it was a lot of challenges before we could start that, because it was ground up. So you're not considered a ground up developer. Although I had a few HMOs under my belt, lenders wouldn't look at you as a developer. You were a first-time developer as far as they were concerned.
So funding-wise, the lenders will perceive you as more high risk. They think you haven't done this before.
That's right.
Yeah.
But there was another hurdle before that. So there was, although we did get planning, it was a Section 106 affordable housing contribution of 200,000. Okay. So effectively, that site wouldn't be profitable if you had to pay that sort of money to the government for Section 106.
Just as a clarification again for people who are watching or listening, that's a taxation that you'd have to pay on the development of that site.
Yeah, affordable housing contributions. Typically, the sort of national guideline is that if you build less than 10 units, you don't actually have to pay affordable housing contribution. But our luck, we were in Reading, and Reading had gone against the national guidelines, and they had their own rules. Yes. So in Reading, you have to pay affordable housing contributions even for 1 unit and above.
Okay.
So that was against us. So we went to a planning consultant who then does a viability assessment for you, where they look at the site and they say, well, actually, it wouldn't be viable for you to pay 200,000 as a site. Mm-hmm. You've got this planning subject to paying the government that 200,000. Eventually, we did a viability assessment, but it takes time, all of these things.
Yes.
So that we then reduced to 70,000. And on hindsight, they did say to us, look, we can actually bring that down to 0, but we need another 6 months. And time was running out, and I was a bit too eager. Mm-hmm. And I thought 70,000, maybe we couldn't make the numbers work and what have you. So I think on hindsight, I should have stuck it out and did that, go that extra mile to reduce it to 0. Yes. Anyway, the decision was made. We stuck to 70,000, and then we looked at funding, but funding was not easy at that point because, as I said, first time developer. Eventually, we got a lender, but I think what they said was, because of your lack of experience in ground ups, if you team up with a construction company that has got a lot of experience and has good, projects that they've delivered, then we could consider you. And that's what I did. I went with a really good construction company, even though we ended up paying over the odds for the project. It was a Paka company, and that, on that basis, we had a good team, we had a good QS on board, all with a lot of experience, and that's how then we managed to get senior debt.
Okay, so then that gives the lender confidence that you have a team on board that are experienced, and it was easier to access the finance. And then the delivery of that project went quite well with this team.
It did.
Yeah.
It went really smoothly. Of course, there were some variations in the whole thing, but then they had the bank had a quantity surveyor, monitoring surveyor. We had our own quantity surveyor, so it was done, properly, all on board. I think the build almost at the point was cost us about £1 million to build that. So it was not a small build.
Yeah. I think the first new build project that I did, it was always a fear of stepping into something I don't know. And like you, it was always that aspiration. We want to develop out of the ground. And it's crazy when you get there, you think, why do you always want to do that? Sometimes it works and sometimes it isn't always the best thing to do. And the way I de-risk that is to have a partner who was actually a QS, who had the background in that. And that's made it much easier. And it reduced a lot of problems and risks for us.
Absolutely. I don't think I'd ever do another project without a QS.
Yes.
Definitely. And I think, I was just talking about some of the last couple of projects which didn't go down as well as they should have, is because we didn't have a QS on board. Right. And that, sometimes you spread yourself too thin. Yes. You're doing too many things, something then gives, and then you suffer.
I think many people that tend to get involved in property have that entrepreneurial mindset because it's a business really, essentially, rather than just investing. It's a business. You've got to build it as a business, and we might have lots of ideas and lots of things going on. And sometimes it's easy to miss on the detail, and we think that'll be okay. But actually, if somebody's not paying attention to that detail, it can very easily spiral out of control.
I learned that the hard way. Yes, I think so. I think 2024 was quite a tough year for me because we'd taken on a lot more, and it wasn't that we did everything. We didn't buy all the properties in 2023. So there was a couple of property and projects we bought in 2021 actually. Okay. But we'd agreed a delayed completion on those. And then the planning took ages and there were some issues in that. And again, I don't think the planning was managed very well. Either way, we got the planning, but then it meant we had to start developing it in 2024. So a lot of the projects came along. So it was too many projects, like 4 projects in a year. For me, my team is not that big. And I think I kind of felt the pressure.
So what were some of the challenges around that when you say felt the pressure? What did that translate to? What did that mean?
I think it meant that we ended up, missing a few things that shouldn't have been missed. So like on one of these projects where I didn't have a QS on board, and then we went with the contractor, maybe not as good as what he did. So he was cheaper. So we ended up with a cheaper contractor because we thought what happened was obviously when we costed the project back in 2021, because if you remember, 2021 was the boom year where prices went up, everything was on up and up. So when we secured that project and we exchanged on it, it was a slightly different market when it was in 2023, where 2023 list trusts, borrowing rates, everything went, it was completely different from that. So when we actually ended up getting planning 2 years from now, it was a different market altogether, and we were trying to save money where we could because the construction costs had gone up about 30% since then as well. So somehow we then took the eye off the ball. We thought, look, in order for us to keep our money, or maybe at least not make too much money but not lose money, we'd have to go with a slightly cheaper contract, and that was the biggest mistake we ever made. In the end, it turned out to be okay. We've now refinanced it and it's rented and all of that, but that was the mistake. We didn't use a QS, and we ended up having too many variations. The contractor threatened to leave halfway because he was in the kind of contractor we would have gone for in previous projects. So that sort of thing.
So they were unhappy about the variations, or
they were asking for more money than the variation that we thought that they needed. So it's kind of a lot of these disagreements, and they were like the quality of the insulation. They were like, oh no, we said it's going to be this, than the other, and kind of those little things that they're trying to save money on, which we didn't want to.
Yeah, the cutting of corners. When you cut so many corners on a square, you end up with a circle. So lots of cutting of corners doesn't give you the outcome you want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the end, it worked out okay. We managed to get it through. We managed to refinance it, and everything worked well. But just that whole process was very stressful.
And then before we talk about commercial conversion, which is another strategy that you've also enjoyed doing, one of the things we talked about was the people around us, and we're also talking about off camera before as well, about personality traits, and you're a very people person, supporting people, having people around you. So you created a community at some point to do that. So tell me more about that.
Absolutely. So I think, back, because I was in an IT job, I was primarily working with teams. And I was in fact managing a large team when I kind of left my job. And that was the bit I really enjoyed, being in communication with people, talking to people. That's where I get my energy from, people. And that was the one thing that was missing in the property business. As you know, it's quite lonely. So in 2016, I started my own networking event, called it the J6 Property Meet, which was kind of an obscure name, but because I didn't want to call it the Slough Property Meet, because as you know, Slough's got such a bad reputation. And J6 happened to be the Junction 6 of the M4. So kind of a vague name, but either way, it kind of took off, I think I put a lot of energy into it, put a lot of effort, and it slowly built up really well. And then I started creating a membership out of it, and I've created a lovely community around it, rebranded it into Titans, which is what it is now, over the COVID period. And it's a great community now. We've got about almost 90 members in it, and just loving it. And I think a lot of my investors have come from the community. A lot of my professional people I work with is in terms of the contractors, architects, my solicitors. Everyone is from the community now, so it's great. I'm loving it.
So it started off as a networking group, but it's more than a networking group now. There's other things that you do as well. It's more of a kind of community vibe, because you were saying, telling me earlier, you go out and do social events and things together as well.
We have fun. We I'm quite activity based as a person. I can't just sit there and talk for like 10 hours and just do nothing. So I want to do stuff. I like action. So we do escape rooms, we do axe throwing, we've done murder mystery dinners, all sorts of fun experiences where people think, it gets you out of your comfort zone as well, and it gets to like team bonding, as the corporate world you would call it, those sort of fun things. But more than that, we also do a lot of educational stuff. So we do site tours. So any of the members who are doing sites, we arrange construction visits to their sites, so people can learn from seeing. Seeing is believing sort of a thing. It helps the members increase their credibility, but it also other members learn from it. We do coffee mornings, so that's once a month in between the two main events, where we have one speaker, and it's like a boardroom style. So we do sort of deep diving into a specific topic. So this month we've got about short leases. So we pick topical subjects, and then we have one speaker talk about that into a more deep diving type of situation.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's a lot of relationships are made from people who get to know, like, and trust. And an environment like that facilitates the opportunity to connect with people, form those relationships, and that's where opportunities really stem from. If I look back at my journey, so much has come from just meeting people along the way, maintaining those conversations. I mean, we met so many years ago. I can't remember how long ago it was, but it's fairly early in our journey, and we've kind of bumped into each other over the years here and there, and it's just maintaining connections. Ultimately, that's what it's about, because you never know where those opportunities will come from.
Yeah, I think one thing I have learned in property is never judge. What is it? Never judge the book by its cover. Yeah. I think you never know where your next investor is going to come from, where your next deal is going to come from. I think assuming someone by their appearances is very deceptive. Yes. Absolutely, that's the one big lesson.
That's definitely the case at networking events.
Yeah.
Now, with planning gain, is that something you continued to do, or did it kind of evolve from that, or was it a case of this is just a route to do the developments? And talk me through that a little bit more.
Yeah, so we did that one project, the ground up. Obviously, it was super challenging, but the end product is amazing. We've got 8 apartments. They've always been fully rented. But what I found,
they weren't to sell; they were to keep.
They were to keep. Actually, to be fair, we were thinking of selling them, but then, if you remember, the Brexit decision happened and the market went really flat. And maybe I should have just stuck to my guns and sold it, and maybe I would have got a good value for it. Somehow I made that decision not to sell. It could be that because I think my development term was running out, and obviously selling is a longer game.
Yes. And so uncertainty of you don't know how long it's going to be in that phase.
If you're in 2021 and your market's going up, great, sell it, put it on the market. But if you're kind of flat, you're kind of in that, making that choice. And I kind of made a decision to keep it, which, rightly or wrongly, it kind of washes its face. But if you look at the yield back in the Southeast, it's like 5.5-6% yield. So it's not going to really give you some amazing cash flow. It's washing its face. But that wasn't the initial, sort of reason for doing it. It was very much to make cash out of it, sell it, and make some money. But either way, it didn't work out that way. But we looked at other deals. We did do some other ground ups. We did a couple of other sites with planning as well. So we did another site in Watford where we bought a site at the back of a shop. It had planning for 4 apartments, but it was a very, very tight site. But then I ended up working with a really good construction company where we built 4 flats. So I've got like a block of 4 flats. That's again still rented. But I think the weakness I found in that particular model, the commercial to resi model, where you're just taking offices or ground up or whatever that is and converting into apartments, is the yield is not quite there. So when you're looking for cash flow, you're like, this is good. I mean, it's great for value creation and asset values up.
For building equity. Yes.
For building equity is great, but the cash flow is not there. But we went and did a few of those projects. Then we did one where we did a ground up, where we bought a Royal British Legion site with planning for 4 houses. We sold that. And that's when it was a light bulb moment, but that was in 2021 actually. Okay. So we got good money for it. And we thought actually the house strategy is quite a good one, where you're not just doing apartments, because I think apartments are a lot more challenging and selling apartments is a lot harder than you would for selling houses. So there's a bigger market for houses, And I think that's the one thing I felt that's a good strategy. So I think maybe going forward, this is something that I'm looking to do.
Yes. And with just adding value via planning and selling those, that's something you explored, or do you always see it through to development?
Yeah, for my sins, I've seen it through to development, but I think that's another strategy this year. I think 2025, I'm definitely exploring, because grey belt, there's a huge opportunity. And I think one of the things that Labour is advocating is building houses. And I think the one thing that they are looking to make easy for property developers is the planning aspect of it. So I think try and go with the flow as opposed to against the flow. So I think that's one of the definitely my key strategies and focus for 2025.
What do you think the government will probably do in the coming year that will make it easier for us as developers? What's your thoughts on what might happen?
I think what they're saying with this whole grey belt relaxation is the presumption in favor of development. So they're looking for brownfield sites. So, previously developed sites, for those of your listeners who don't know what brownfield means, is previously developed land. They'll go for presumption in favor of development. They will make the council's targets, or they have already made it mandatory for their 5-year land and housing supply. So they will have to show the central government how they're going to meet those targets. So they're going to have mandatory targets, or they do have them, how they're going to meet them. So for them to say that, no, we're not going to give you planning because the birds or some sort of, some ecological reason, which, they might relax some of those ecological reasons. They might relax. They will still probably keep the affordable housing reasons because obviously they still want to build more social housing. But I think they're going to relax some of the rules where are hindering developers, basically.
Yeah, it should. I agree. I think little changes that will make it easier to get planning approved. That's what will make the difference.
They're reducing the committee sizes, all of those things, which, little, as you said, the small changes they're going to make here and there, relaxing some of those rules will help developers, make the site viable, and somehow they're going to have to compensate, right, for the extra higher labor costs, higher material costs, and if they can help them make those sites viable, then they'll go ahead and build them and then actually start selling them.
Yeah, because developers like you and I are hungry to build and develop. Financially, it needs to work, as you talked about. There needs to be a profit in it, otherwise there's no point in doing it. And secondly, there needs to be a process you can follow in order to get the planning approval to be able to go and build. If we look at a map of the country, about 95% of it is not built on, it's just green.
Yeah.
So it's not really a shortage of land and space. The control is planning, is trying to get the approval to build something. We have a car park next to us just here. You can think, well, why can't we put a 10-story block of apartments there? There'll be a lot of challenges around that. But if it was possible to do that, this would ease some of the demand on housing and certainly start meeting some of those targets.
Yeah, I think it's the mindset of the council as well. They call the development control department.
Yes.
They're not trying to help you. They're trying to hinder you.
Yes.
So I think that mindset change would be great. That the government should be telling them, look, we haven't built houses, or we are not building social housing at all. Let's encourage the private developers. I think the percentage of small developers is massively reduced now because of the pain involved in developing sites.
It's just not viable. Yes.
So I think if they can help with the mindset change and the small regulation and deregularize the sector, I think there's hope.
And one of the things that makes it easier as developers when we don't have all the problems of planning, and I'm guessing which is why you looked at commercial to residential as a route, the Class MA route. So at what point did you start doing those type of developments?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So obviously there was this whole resurgence of empty bank buildings. So we started looking at that. But back in 2000, if you rewind back, the first PD of the office to resi came around in 2013.
Yes, yeah.
But I think as and when that strategy became popular, it was almost difficult to get those sites because
it's also around the southeast where it really exploded.
Massively. And those sites, the bigger developers, you wouldn't get a look in, as a small developer, you wouldn't get a look in because obviously you had a higher cost of finance because you're having to borrow the money, whereas some of the bigger developers had cash.
Yes.
So they wouldn't necessarily have to factor in some of the cost of the finance and what have you. So you wouldn't get a look in the beginning. But then as and when the supply, so also what started to happen is the office sector started to shrink. Obviously in 2020, the working from home came in. A lot of the non-grade A offices were just becoming derelict. The owners of those sites then started to feel the pain because they were still having to pay council tax because there's only so much you can mitigate the empty council tax and the rates and stuff. So when you're still having an empty office building and you're having to pay the business rates, I'm sure it's going to pinch you, right? Yes. So you started seeing a massive, big supply of offices coming onto the market. And we thought, look, let's start looking at that. And again, that whole office to resi, that whole thing, let's jump on that bandwagon as well. And I think
buzzword, yeah.
another shiny penny. But so I think I started looking at that, and that's how I started doing that. I'm trying to think back and see what my first office to resi was. But I think it was just, it'll come to me in a minute. I'm trying to think which one was my first one. But
the banks was the model that you liked, where because there were a lot of banks, and there still are, who are vacating the buildings, and those buildings are coming up for sale.
Yeah.
And it was taking those. And when you think about a bank generally, it's not a building that you think is an obvious conversion to residential because the layout and stuff. And how have you experienced and found that?
I mean, the good thing about the banks are if you look at, like, when you remember going to a traditional bank branch, there's a lot of little office rooms and whatever, but they're all stud walls, right? So you can open plan it quite easily. So that's a good thing. What's not good sometimes is if they are like very deep buildings,
Yes.
the back of the building might not have a lot of sunlight,
Yes,
not a
for
lot of
security,
windows.
there'll be no windows and stuff and access at the
Exactly.
back.
So that's the space that you need to be very creative about and see what you can do. Obviously, bedrooms, living rooms all have to have natural sunlight. But what you can do is you can have kitchens, bathrooms.
Yes.
Those sort of spaces don't need natural light coming into it.
Yes.
So what you could do is, if you have a good architect who can design those spaces really well, then you can have an open space, but if you can have lots of light coming in, or you can have where you can actually apply for more windows, more light to come in, then that would be a good advantage. But I think what we found in the banks was, what was good was the open plan,
Yes.
and you can carve it as much how you like it, but the sunlight and daylight, that was the disadvantage, I think.
So the ground floor you're converting to residential
As well, in some cases, yes, where you could get the light coming in, whether you could create it through light wells, or you could apply for planning for additional windows, because in the permitted development, you could do the conversion inside under permitted development, but any change to the facade would need planning.
So putting new windows in, new doors and things like this, you need to go back to planning. But then you can mix the two, where you do your bit you can under permitted, and then you apply for planning for small.
Ideally,
tweaks.
what people do is they apply for planning as a commercial building. So they're not going to they're not going to go in for the Class MA, the permitted development application straight away. They'll go in and say, we want to create more windows, blah, 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 do it as a commercial unit. So they think, well, it could be another business, or then once you get the windows planning, then you go back and go for the permitted development into
So just to clarify that, so for example, in that bank building, you could put a planning application in to put some windows and access at the back to get more light coming in. And once you've got those still as a commercial building, then you use your prior approval rights to change it to residential, take it through that process.
Yeah.
So have you found that process smooth every time, or there have been challenges going through the prior approval route?
So prior approval, and especially in the Class MA route, which is the bank Class E to residential, is 56 days deemed consent. And 56 days is continuous 56. It's not just 56 working days. It's 56 days from the day you paid for your application. That's when the clock starts ticking. And if after 56 days you don't get consent, it's deemed consent. I think you can just write to the council and say, you haven't given us consent, therefore it's deemed consent according to the law. So we have got some smooth consents. There was one case where in Henley where we didn't get the consent, and it was a very technical reason they gave for not giving the consent. So the building that we bought was a large bank building, and part of the building was previously already converted into apartments, 4 leasehold apartments, which were then sold out on long leases. Like 100-year leases, whatever it might be. But we were obviously buying the freehold of the entire building, but the bank was only occupying, let's say, 2/3 of the space.
Right.
So what they came back as a challenge to us was that it's not a commercial building, because part of the building is already residential. And they used that. But they didn't come back to us within 56 days.
Okay.
So I think they said, oh, sorry, our IT systems were down, and therefore, you don't get permission. So then we hired a barrister to go back and, come back to them. And then as soon as they got the barrister's letter saying that, X, Y, and Z, your reasons are not valid, they're not legal, whatever. And they gave us, then they had to agree to them.
And I think sometimes you do get that in the in the planning department, where people make decisions that may not be technically correct or legally correct, but there are no real consequences. I remember having a conversation with a former planner on the podcast. They were saying that people make these decisions, they don't necessarily know if they're legally correct, but because there's no real consequences on them, they just shrug their shoulders and just do it, and there doesn't cause personally them any problem.
And I think that's the thing, right? You and I, as property developers, investors, we're not interested in going into the legal side of things, because that's one thing. It's just the most stressful thing, right? Going into a legal battle or suing. If you have to, you do it, but it's not your preference. You just want to get on with your business, right? And do your stuff.
Absolutely. So before we start wrapping up, tell me about this year and next year. Where do you see some of the opportunities, and what is your focus? You touched on already possibly flipping more property rather than just adding to the portfolio. Where do you see some of the opportunities, and particularly those people based down in the southeast? Sometimes they feel it's harder to start.
Yeah. So what I've found is, as you mentioned, I've built up a really good portfolio. I've got reasonable amount of equity in it. So one option is to sell it all and, take your equity and run. But, you got capital gains tax, and also I'd say the house prices haven't gone up as much as you would have thought.
Yes.
You know, typically when you started learning about property, they'd say every 7-10 years they double. But I don't think we've seen that kind of growth. It's been a stop and start.
There's little spurts and stuff, but
Yeah.
no, it's not kind of
Smooth, like
linear.
going
Yeah.
up curve,
Yeah.
you know. And I feel that the portfolio is great and it's got a lot of equity in it, but we need to see more growth
Yes.
before I'm at that point where I think, oh wow, it's gonna this amazing growth and we can sell it and and live on a beach somewhere. So I think where my challenges have been recently is the cash flow is squeezed because, as you know, with HMOs, the cost of borrowing has gone up, the cost of bills has gone up, the rents have gone up as well, but not in par with the cost of borrowing and the bills. So I think what I'm finding is profit margins have squeezed, cash flow is tight. So I think I've kind of held property quite a lot as my sort of traditional Asian mentality, but I kind of think I've parked that now. This year is all about grey belt.
Yes.
Working with the tide, as I mentioned previously. So looking at planning uplift deals on the land side. Second thing is doing flips. So potentially looking at auctions, which I've never ever done, believe it or not. So potentially starting with a pot and just flipping and creating a larger pot with that, but that's a separate pot. So that business will just continue as normal. I would just want to systemize it a bit more and have maybe take on one more staff on board on that side of things. So it frees up my time completely to then focus on grey belt sites, planning uplift, and then flips in auctions, potentially short leases, which I think is a great strategy in 2025. And just focus on 1 or 2 strategies and just use that pot to grow.
Yes, I thought it's really interesting. It's very easy to either get stuck in one particular strategy or jump around between lots of different. I think the great thing you've done, you've kind of evolved slowly through different strategies, you build the knowledge, and I said the best way is to you just do it, you implement, and that's where you get the results. So I just want to say thank you again so much for coming and sharing some of your wisdom and knowledge with us, much appreciated. And if somebody wants to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think they can just Google me. They can reach out to me on my event. It'd be great to see them at my event. We run Titans, as you know. It's 9 events a year. We run it at Gerrard's Cross. For those of you who know, it's not many people have heard of Gerrard's Cross, but it's near Beaconsfield. It's got the model town village. It's not far from there. We run it on every second Thursday of the month. We're a great property community, so come and check us out. So check me out on teamtitans.co.uk, or you can use Manni Chopra on my Instagram handles, my YouTube, and my Facebook handles. So reach out to me that way. Come and see me at Titans. We run amazing events, and we've got a great community of over 100 people almost, and we'd love to see you.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you. Much appreciated. We'll put some of those links in the description as well, and also on screen as well.
Brilliant.
Thank you once again.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Aj.